You're watching The Legal Breakdown. Glenn, there was a story that took hold of the entire country about someone who threw a Subway sandwich at the chest of one of these law enforcement officials who Trump deployed into Washington, D.C. We now have an update on that case in the aftermath of Pam Bondi and all of these other top-ranking officials of the DOJ promising to really exact as much revenge on this guy as they could.
A grand jury sitting in Washington, D.C. as the conscience of the community refused to indict the man who threw a sandwich at a police officer, refused to indict him on a felony charge of assaulting a police officer. Brian, this is such a consequential legal development. It may not feel like it. However, the grand jury is designed to be a check on governmental power. The grand jury, which consists of citizens who just happen to live in the jurisdiction where a suspected crime was committed and to whom the prosecutor presents evidence of that crime, and then sitting as the conscience of the community, the grand jurors assess whether there's enough evidence to indict someone and whether indicting someone is the right thing to do. And the grand jury sitting in Washington, D.C. said, we will not indict the person who threw a Subway sandwich, which bounced off the chest, including the bulletproof vest of a police officer. We will not indict that person for felony assault on a police officer. That person, Brian, his name is Sean C. Dunn. He also happened to be a paralegal at the Department of Justice at the time. And as we've all seen on the videotape that captured this incident in real time, Sean Dunn was yelling and screaming that this is fascism, that we don't want you in our city, that we don't need you in our city. And he was hot, he was agitated, and you could see in this sort of momentary fit, he threw a Subway sandwich and it struck the officer. That doesn't really look like a felony assault to this old prosecutor. It looks like an assault because it's an unlawful touching or unlawfully making contact with somebody, which constitutes a kind of assault, which we call a battery. But Jeanine Pirro, the United States Attorney for the District of Columbia, the top prosecutor, said, we are marching forward with a felony assault charge. And the grand jury said, yeah, not so fast, Jeanine. Back up, because you've got to go through us, the grand jury, and we reject your overreach, your abuse of prosecutorial power, and we will not indict Sean Dunn for a felony assault on a police officer. Brian, this proves that the opposition, the lawful, honest, righteous opposition to what Donald Trump is doing in Washington, D.C. and beyond is on the rise, and that is a damn good thing for the health, indeed the viability of American democracy.
Glenn, you've heard the saying that the prosecutors could get a grand jury to indict a ham sandwich. And so what does it say that in this instance where there was actually a sandwich on display, like a battery with a sandwich on display in front of a grand jury, what does it say that even this case wasn't enough to get an indictment?
Yeah, it's so important, Brian, and I did resist the urge, but now that you've given me the opening, I'm going to say apparently a grand jury will indict a ham sandwich, but not a Subway sandwich, or right. A person who throws a Subway sandwich at a police officer. Let me tell you, I reject and denounce throwing anything at a police officer, including a sandwich that obviously can't really do the officer any harm. It's wrong. Don't do it. We need to protest, but we need to do it peacefully. Let Donald Trump's goons, and not all police officers are goons, but certainly some of them, particularly ICE officers these days, are acting like thugs and goons and a Gestapo. Let them engage in overreach, in abuse, and God forbid, in violence against we the people who are peacefully protesting and resisting and opposing Donald Trump's determination to become the dictator that he so desperately wants to be. But here's the thing. Whereas a grand jury has rejected the felony charge, what might happen next? Well, Jeanine Pirro might stumble forward and bring a misdemeanor charge, which is a lesser criminal offense, where there's really no harm to the officer that came as a result of the assault and or battery. And here's what our viewers should know. A felony charge requires the grand jury to sign off on an indictment, but a misdemeanor charge can simply be brought by complaint. What does that mean? It means a prosecutor, Jeanine Pirro, or somebody she designates, can sit down at their desk, can sign a misdemeanor charge, and present it to the court. It doesn't need to be run through the grand jury. So there is no conscience of the community check against governmental overreach, abuse, prosecutorial misconduct that seems to quickly which seems to be quickly becoming Jeanine Pirro's middle name, Jeanine Prosecutorial Overreach Pirro. Let's see if it continues, because this, frankly, is not the only time in D.C. in recent days a grand jury has rejected Jeanine Pirro's request to bring felony charges against somebody in this kind of a setting.
How big of a blow is this to the Trump administration, given the fact that obviously seeking some degree of retribution against this guy was a top priority for them? I think when they raided his house or apartment, they sent in like 20 law enforcement agents for a guy who had thrown a sandwich at somebody. And so clearly they wanted to make a big show of setting an example out of this guy. And so how big of a blow is it that they couldn't even secure an indictment against him?
You know, I'm not going to call it a blow for the Trump administration as much as I'm going to call it a victory for democracy and the democratic process and the rule of law, which requires, thank goodness, that before prosecutors can bring a felony charge, you've got to persuade the conscience of the community, the grand jurors, that it's the right thing to do. It's both supported by the evidence and it is not governmental or prosecutorial overreach. So this is a victory for both democracy and the rule of law and the criminal justice system as it is designed to work. And yes, it's a defeat. It is, egg on the face of the Trump administration. So all in all, I love to see how we, the people, in all of our different capacities and responsibilities, including grand jurors, are rising up to oppose the kind of fascism that Donald Trump is trying to deploy in Washington, D.C. and elsewhere. And let me give our viewers just a couple of nuts and bolts, Brian, because I think it's important for them to know what the grand jury looks like. A grand jury consists of as many as 23 citizens drawn from all across the community, the jurisdiction, Washington, D.C., in which the alleged crime occurred. And these are people from all walks of life who swear an oath to do justice by their responsibility to pass judgment on these cases, whether there is evidence showing probable cause that a crime has been committed and a certain person has committed that crime. And whereas it requires or it involves as many as 23 citizens who will be sitting in a particular grand jury, and multiple grand juries are up and running in D.C. every day of the week. I know because I spent decades before grand juries in Washington, D.C. It can consist of as few as 16 people. So 23 are called for jury service. In order to do business, present witnesses to the grand jury and ask them to vote out indictments, you need a quorum of at least 16 people. And then of those 16 people, when you ask them to vote on a charge, return an indictment, 12 of the 16 have to vote in favor of indicting that person. And it looks like out of the 16 or as many as 23 who were present, Jeanine Pirro could not muster 12, a dozen citizens who believed that the evidence was there and or this was the right thing to do.
If you look at how the federal government kind of responded to their defeats as it related to Kilmar Abrego Garcia, they then, ginned up some trumped up charges in Tennessee. Is there some other avenue that they can take, knowing, again, that they want to set an example out of this guy, and they take these specific instances really seriously because they want to make sure that those are again examples set for the broader ecosystem so that they can clamp down on any dissent. And so is there any other avenue that they could take to go after this person, recognizing that this one failed?
They've already done it. So what Pam Bondi announced, with much fanfare, she was very proud of herself, is this young man, Sean Dunn, who was a paralegal at the Department of Justice, when he was, on tape throwing a sandwich at a police officer, she instantly arranged to have him fired. I'm not so sure that is a lawful termination that will sort itself out moving forward. But you ask what else can be done? Well, for starters, trying to prosecute somebody and firing them from their DOJ job is pretty severe punishment in and of itself. But what can be done legitimately? Well, they can try to bring a misdemeanor case against him, which I suspect they will do if they haven't already done it. And then that case will be run through the courts. Let's see if he's convicted of that misdemeanor charge if they bring it, or if he is again sort of acquitted, found not guilty based on his conduct on that day. What can they do illegitimately? Well, Brian, they could order an IRS audit of the man, or they could go after the man's relatives. I mean, that may sound like hyperbole, but in this administration, it's not. What else could they do? Well, I suspect we will hear Donald Trump say or post, if he hasn't already, that the grand jurors are a bunch of radical, lunatic, left-wing nut jobs who, did the wrong thing in this case. And then who knows, maybe he'll go after the grand jurors and their families. Hyperbole? I think not.
If we do see an instance where the IRS goes after this guy, I mean, that's as clear vindictive prosecution as you could possibly imagine. And so aren't these instances where we have the potential to see the Trump administration retaliate? Wouldn't that kind of put the administration in a precarious position more than it would even put the administration's enemies?
It would. It wouldn't necessarily be vindictive prosecution if they ordered a dirty IRS audit. It would be governmental and executive branch vindictiveness fueling an audit.
And is that a crime? Is there some statute where that's a crime, or how would that work?
Brian, that's a great point. And it could literally be a conspiracy to misuse the power of the federal government, of the executive branch, to retaliate against somebody who is now yet another Donald Trump avowed enemy. I think that's a bit of a stretch. I wouldn't think that even if they ordered a dirty, unfounded IRS audit of Sean Dunn because they couldn't get him in the criminal case, that that would result in any kind of criminal investigation or charges against the Trump administration. Certainly not in a Pam Bondi-led Department of Justice. But it could very well give rise to a civil suit that could be filed by Sean Dunn, and he could seek money damages from a vindictive federal government. So, there is no telling just how far Donald Trump's executive branch and his dirty, executive branch officials will go to try to now punish Sean Dunn or the grand jurors or the city of Washington, D.C. itself, because goodness knows in D.C. we are all being punished. I'm right on the outskirts, and I worked in D.C. for more than a quarter of a century. There's no telling what lengths he will go to continue to crack down, to insult, to be heavy-handed on the people of the District of Columbia as a result of, one thing going sideways for the administration.
Well, we will, of course, stay on top of this and all other legal news that breaks. For those who are watching, if you'd like to support our work, it's completely free to do so. Please subscribe to both of our channels. The links are right here on this screen. Again, it's a great way to support us and independent media more broadly. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirshner.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown.